Hello, my name is GHANDOUR, and in this video presentation I'll be discussing my research and plans for a folly on the site of the Beirut port. The following is a quote from Martin Heidegger's Building, Dwelling, Thinking. Mortals would never be capable of it, if dwelling were merely a staying on earth under the sky before the divinities among mortals. Rather, dwelling itself is always a staying with things. Dwelling, as preserving, keeps the fourfold in that with which mortals stay, in things. Heidegger's Building, Dwelling, Thinking is a daunting read for many who lack the prior understanding of what caused this writing to come to fruition. It is a philosopher's plea to architects to acknowledge nature, to reflect and include it in their works, for humans dwell within the fourfold, the amalgamation of earth, sky, divinities, and mortals. We build as a result of such dwelling. But what does it mean to build with the prospects of dwelling in mind? Building is tied to protection, nurturing, and sparing, something Heidegger closely correlates with freedom, as by admitting nature's presence into building, one is allowing the fourfold to permeate space, thus allowing for dwelling to occur. However, man does not solely dwell in a building, he dwells in the spaces around it, as the building is a locale, a place of gathering, now an inherent part of earth, and by proxy, the fourfold. Dwelling is not the primary target that building aims to achieve, as it may not even happen within many buildings. The main intent is always to protect man from the harsher aspects of the fourfold, the natural phenomena, as well as to provide space within which man can perform desired activities inherent to man's evolution. Thus, building serves primarily humanity's need for shelter and protection to sustain on earth. Thenceforth, the notion of sparing in relation to building allows for dwelling to occur. This form of safeguarding, observed when the act of building does not disrupt the nature of the fourfold, opens the gate for the fourfold to nurture man, who is now bound to dwell within and around areas created by man-made inert structures. Therefore, building as a locale is part of an extensio, or a surrounding of scapes. When the latter allows trees and plants to sprout and grow, thus keeping man in an intimate connection with pristine nature and the wilderness, the result of man's and nature's mutual nurturing of each other allows for peace to exist, thus providing havens in which man can be free to evolve. Therefore, by acquiescing the fourfold as integral to the act of building, man can dwell peacefully in consciousness, given that, for Heidegger, the essence of dwelling resides in existing among the earth, under the sky, driving for prosperity that only man's divine creative aptitudes and history allow. For my Rig 4 musing, I focused on the concept of spatial awareness and the subordination of a building to nature. I believe I have achieved this by creating delicate structural supports with small permeable vacuums alluding to the space it occupies with and within nature. The following images were my earlier exploration of the state of permeability, where I experimented with projection of light and shadows. By extending the horizontally positioned stick and the structure it supports, I created an object in which permeability is in continuous occurrence. For my rig end model, I incorporated the additional concept of a free fall by adding elevated walkways as well as voids within walled structures, all interconnected by several bridges and pathways. One begins by entering through this hole in the walled structure. They will then be able to gain elevation via this pathway. After crossing, they will find another void in the walled structure, which will lead them to the outside. Then they must continue their ascent via this stairway and enter into this tunnel. This tunnel is then mechanically capable of expanding, bringing them across to the other side. Once on the other side, they will continue their descent via another stairway leading back onto this final pathway. This final pathway eventually leads to a structure similar to an observatory, which is capable of contracting and relaxing. This act of contracting and relaxing represents the permeability of nature within a building, as well as entering the fourfold, as when it is contracted, it represents man's resistance of nature and the buildings that Martin Heidegger protested against. When it's relaxed, more light is able to proceed into the structure, vastly changing how it is perceived. The following images are my earlier explorations of permeability and freefall within the rig and models. I began by developing a contraction that extends beyond a simple support and adding a rotating mechanism which incorporates the model into its surroundings. I then proceeded to experiment with using opposing planes in an attempt to give a sense of spatial presence and diversity. These explorations, along with the incorporation of walkways, led me to develop a bridged structure with motion within it through a moving bridge, as well as a continuous motion of freefall via dangling cylinders. Returning back to my final rig and model, the amalgamation of different strategies that develop a state of spatiality and permeability have created a building which is able to join the fourfold, enabling dwelling. In this image, I manipulated certain elements to give a sense of interaction of the model with its surroundings. The following technical drawings set to explore the interactions between the elements of my rig and model and the silos, as well as demonstrate where permeability is achieved. When examining this photo of the silos, it aesthetically connects to an earlier era of Beirut, which was a hub for nautical activity in the region. These remnants are now devoid of purpose, as the silos are no longer capable of storing grains. This creates the perfect site that has evolved back into a space that can be rewritten and redefined. The aim of this project is to develop a folly along the site of the Beirut port. The remains of the silos inspire us to think about the landscape of the city and how it has drastically changed and shed its cultural roots in favor of urbanization. This is exhibited in the following maps, which detail the evolution of the port and observe the increase in area as well as the diminishing of historical remains, an action which drastically impacted the Manara area, something I came to notice during my contextual group research. The now demolished homes and docking stations were cemented into the natural rock formations, joining nature while simultaneously preserving it. This beautiful achievement has since been overwritten by bland extensions of land, serving no real purpose other than a means to move around. Even the open port has since been reduced to a maze of machinery and warehouses, effectively depriving man of a beautiful scape to dwell in. This impression of old Beirut deeply encouraged and inspired my model, as well as their natural ties to the element of sand, which poetically comes from sediment, can be converted to structural objects in the form of sandstone, or even in the case of technical developments, glass. Now that we have gone through the contextual research, we can begin to understand where this folly stands in relation to the site of the silos. The folly would be mounted onto the silo, with the side with the contracting scope of permeability facing the ocean. This allows for a light to go through this scope as well as all the other voids inside this wall, creating beautiful shadows on the other side, as already seen here. In addition, the contracting scope will allow different levels of light to pass, constantly changing the visual created inside.